Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today as we come together to learn more about cost optimization for cloud solutions. My name is Hussam Mohsini. I'm the program manager for Microsoft Reactor in Abu Dhabi. Microsoft Reactors are hubs for founders and developers to meet, learn, and connect to local peers, as well as industry leading ideas and technology from Microsoft, partners, and the open source community. It's also home to the Microsoft for Startups program, with a diverse mix of hands-on workshops, expert panels, and community events. There's something for everyone. Check out our calendar of events on meetup.com and join our coming sessions. Our speaker today is Punit Shah. Punit is a technical consultant with over 15 years of experience in engaging with customers as subject matter expert on Microsoft and cloud technologies. At Microsoft, Punit works with startups on how to best use Azure capabilities, customized and aligned with organization goals. He helps architect, design, implement, migrate, and grow applications on the Microsoft Azure platform. Feel free to ask questions during the session. We will have regular stops to answer these questions, and also feel free to tweet about the session and tag us on Twitter. The hashtag is Reactor Abu Dhabi, and the Twitter handle for our global reactor is MSFT Reactor. Make sure you also adjust the playback settings to select the highest quality for the best experience during the session. And with all that said, I hand over the mic to our speaker to start the session.
Hey, thank you very much, Hussam. Hello, good afternoon, good evening, good morning, based on wherever you're from. Glad to have you on board here for today's session, where we will focus on, in general, our learnings from the customers about cost optimizing the solutions that are deployed onto cloud, and primarily we'll focus on some of the services which are specific to Azure as such. Okay, I'll be sharing the presentation screen now. Cool. So yeah, what the session is about, we're not going to talk about some kind of magic formula or a script that I'll be sharing at the end of the session, which you run and boom, your cloud consumption charges go down or anything of that sort. As on the contrary, what we're going to talk about is a practical approach, where we've taken these learnings from hundreds of customers, understand, why do we have these challenges associated with the overall cost or the consumption charges in the cloud, and then we'll focus on the common causes that we've seen across all the scenarios, and combining both of those, we'll come up with a set of recommendations that should help us in majority of scenarios to reduce the overall consumption of your cloud-based solution, irrespective of the service provider that you use. Okay, so talking about challenges, where does the challenge essentially come from? So if you look at it, as you move your workloads to cloud, the major shift has been, you're moving more towards operational expenditure compared to capital expenditure as used to be a traditional case. Now this transition is big. As we embrace this change, it certainly calls for change in our traditional outlook, processes, culture, whatever is associated when it comes to IT spends, and one very good way to demonstrate this change or, the requirement for all the other associated changes is if somebody posts across a question to you, hey, can you tell me confidently about the exact consumption numbers, for your cloud based solution or anything of that sort? That is always a challenge, and the challenge is unpredictability. Budgeting, as it used to be, is no more a one-time activity. I'm pretty sure all of us would prefer like a single-click solution where we get a very simplified billing, predictability, all of that. But considering how these cloud services work, how are they charged, and the variety of services available, and the different billing models and everything, it is far from reality. And that is where the major challenge comes in terms of understanding the overall cost implications of every component associated with your cloud-based solution. Okay, so why is this needed in first place? Let's take two distinct scenarios. Let's say for startup, say you're a startup growing up, you tie up with a service provider, you may get a sponsored subscription. And then what happens is, as you focus on innovation, you try new services, deploy new solutions and all of it. One factor that often gets overlooked during this particular thing is how those services are being charged. What cost are you accumulating? Is this in line with what your overall objective is in terms of the operating cost of the solution and things like that? And as you mature towards your, moving out of sponsorship towards your paid subscription and things like that, those are the times I've seen typically customers reach out and, hey, Puneet, can we do something about this? These numbers, they seem too high, and we're going to match here out of sponsorship, and we got to fix this. How do we approach this? And at the same time, there is a very strong pressure, with the go-to-market timelines and all of it. So it becomes pretty challenging because the fine grain points about the cost aspects of various services that you use as part of the solution, they typically get overlooked as you focus on innovation and things like that. Let's take a different setup and scenario, like enterprise. You decide, okay, you're going to adapt your solutions to the cloud, you start migrating. Essentially, what happens is you try to have a match to match migration, like, hey, we had a VMs here with so and so capacity or a configuration, try to provision something similar in the cloud. And somewhere down the line, what happens is when you start trying, the cost comparison between what you had previously and what you have on the cloud and things like that, what essentially leads to is, just because the things weren't done in an optimal way and mostly with traditional approach and all of it, you often see your budget are overrun during such scenarios. So it is very, very important that cost optimization should be part of your technical decision making right from the word go, because every decision that you take with regards to service to be used, the region to be used, how are you going to use it, has inevitably some kind of cost implication that will, reflect upon your budget. So taking forward, what are the common causes we've seen with all these customers? So broadly to categorize, I've seen like, it is primarily can be bucketed into four categories. One is knowledge, another one is governance, sponsorship, as well as impact. I'll dig deep into all of this. So talking about knowledge. So it is not like one aspect of a service like, hey, this is capable of doing X, Y, Z, and we're using all of these capabilities and things like that. What is important here is, as and when you evaluate a particular service from a service provider to be utilized within your solution, you've got to focus or have clarity in terms of how is it priced. More often than not, this particular factor gets overlooked and eventually results in billing surprises. The other thing also here is, instead of pre-provisioning all the capacity that you need, always evaluate whether a given service has built-in capability to operate in elastic model where you can define your auto scale rules, and then it will scale based on your load and then scale down when those resources are not needed. Also, for a given objective, if you look at cross service providers, there are always more than one alternatives available to implement a certain functionality. Let's say if you want relational database, you might have SQL, you might have Postgre, you might have MariaDB. If you want non-SQL, let's say you have Azure Storage Table, you can have Mongo, you can have Cosmos. Evaluate all those alternatives, evaluate in terms of technical capabilities, as well as the cost implications that these services bring in to the overall solution, and then decide which one will be the best fit for your use case scenario. The next one is consolidation. This typically comes into pictures like where you have more than one services deployed. And then what happens is, for every uh, use case scenario, let's say you have a marketing front end, you have an internal audit front end and things like that, it may not be necessary that you host all of them on a separate compute instance, for example. They can be consolidated. So evaluate if you have more than one instance of a given services to be utilized in the application, is there a way you can consolidate some of them? Because when you consider all these factors together, pricing, scalability, alternatives, consolidation, what they eventually result to help you with is the overall cost benefits. And last but not the least, whatever services do you use? Is it configured and used in an optimal way? Just because you're getting started and on premise, you had certain hardware available, let's say 16 CPU, 32 gigs of RAM and things like that, does not necessarily mean you need exactly same. Start, try it out. If you need it, of course, you should use it. But if you observe that over the period of 7 days or 15 days or 30 days, you see that hardware is highly underutilized, then it calls for review and ensure that we take appropriate measures to configure the service in an optimal way. So when I talk about knowledge, it's not about the technical capabilities of the service. It is all these aspects that go along together to play a very big role in terms of overall cost implications of every decision that you make with regards to the service that you use. The next one that comes into picture, which is very, very important, is also the governance. Now, why is governance important? We are moving away from like traditional kind of DevOps, where for everything the developers needed to do, they had to reach out to admins, and they'll provision it, then give access to developers and all of it. We're moving to a highly agile world, and in other words, we're moving towards cloud native governance. So we remove all those barriers which eventually result in like higher velocity in terms of your ability, your team's ability to deploy resources and things like that. But that should never come at the cost of compliance and the overall control that you have on the environment, which is where some of the built-in capabilities that you have. Now, this technical terminologies are specific to Azure, but you have similar capabilities with other cloud service providers also. So let's say to talk about policy. So although you can give your developer team full access to manage and deploy resources, as a subscription owner, you can still implement some kind of enforcement in terms of which regions can they choose to deploy the resources, what size of resources can they deploy, many other things associated with how do you want your overall setup of infrastructure to be like. Similarly, you have something called as blueprints in Azure, which helps you deploy and update your entire cloud environments in a repeatable manner, using what we refer to as composable artifacts. So you can define your entire environment like policies, role-based access controls, templates that deploy these resources, which eventually together go into an environment and you convert that into a blueprint to give a simple experience where you can simply do it in a repeatable manner, as well as you can lock down any foundational infrastructure that is shared across subscription. So any developer or an IT admin cannot even by mistake, change some of those core configuration that are needed across. Resource graph is basically a service that lets you query all your resources across all your subscriptions. So you get a complete overview in terms of what you have. When your infrastructure grows, over a period of time where you have multiple subscriptions, and let's say for different customers or different organizations within the company, each of them further have dev test environment, staging environment, production environment, and so on. So, it becomes pretty tough to take a look at all the resources that are available across all the subscriptions. And this is where, service like Resource Graph helps you query and explore all your resources at scale, and this service queries that you run, you can basically filter them, you can iteratively explore the resources based on governance requirements like, hey, I want to see all the databases deployed in this region, and with so and so configuration or something of that sort. And it also helps you assess the impact of applying policies in a very large heterogeneous environment as such. And last but not the least, basically you have management group, which basically helps you define your, organizational structure in terms of how your subscriptions and associated resources would look like, So it is basically again a first class resource on Azure, which helps you organize your resources in a flexible but manageable hierarchy, which typically reflects your organizational hierarchy. And on top of that, you can have all those additional capabilities like role-based access control policy, blueprints, and all of it. And the most important one, when it comes to governance is things like, a cost monitoring, which is again available in the cloud console for almost all service providers, where you get a complete overview in terms of what is the cost associated with every resource that you're running in your subscription and what the monthly projections look like and all of it. You can set your own budgets, you can set your alerts like let me know whenever I reach 70% of my budget or 80% of budget and things like that. So it can always play a proactive role in terms of helping you monitor how those cloud configuration with regards to like governance capability really play a very big role in terms of ensuring that resources are well within your I would say compliance as well as all the resources to be assessed as such, not just having everybody a free end at deploying whatever they need to. Okay, with that I'm going to take a pause, take a look if there are questions published, and then try to answer them before we move on to the next section of the presentation. Okay, cool. I'm just checking if there are any questions. Perfect. So I don't think so any questions at the moment. So we'll continue with the presentation. And now what are we going to look at is essentially recommendations, service specific recommendations. So when you look at it broadly, most of those services they can be categorized in terms of your compute, your database requirement, which can be part of storage, but there's a reason I kept this specifically here as a separate category because I'm using many other things under the storage bucket, as you will see in the subsequent slides. And compute typically uncovers all your compute options apart from like networking capabilities and all of it. So we're going to dive specifically into service specific recommendations about how it can help you reduce the overall consumptions. And these recommendations that are coming in, they are coming primarily from our observations working with various customers, where we saw, hey, these things were done incorrectly, and once we fixed that, we saw a delta. Let's say delta could be anywhere. For my best and worst case scenario, we were able to reduce the consumption charges right from, let's say, up to 3% per month to well up to 60%, depending on how the environment was configured, how the resources were deployed, and all of it. So all these recommendations, although I'm going to use Azure as a platform to explain or walk through some of them, they pretty much apply more or less in the similar fashion to other service providers as well. Just that the technical terminologies for some of those things that I'm going to talk about may change depending on the cloud service provider that you use. Okay, so talking about compute. So I'm pretty sure like most of you who are onto the or to say usage of cloud as such, you definitely use one or the other form of compute coming into picture. It could be a virtual machine, it could be like scale sets. There are disks associated with that. There are licenses coming into picture. You may have production environment. You may have dev test environments, all of that. So how do you evaluate, let's say, what is the scope of improving the cost consumption when the compute charges come into picture? So let's focus on one thing at a time. So talking about virtual machine. So generally, I recommend customers for whatever VMs that you provision, evaluate the metrics and the performance, let's say for last week or 30 days, and see is this optimally configured. So you may have a machine with certain amount of RAM and CPU provision, and then you observe, let's say for past 30 days, I'm not utilizing even 25% of that. So those are the kind of good candidates where you evaluate and then figure out, hey, this certainly looks like an over provision environment. Is this something that I need? Can I downsize this? What will be the cost implication? And at the same time, what will be the performance implication? Similarly, when you talk about disks associated with your virtual machines, you may have a production environment where your disk throughput is of critical importance. You may have a staging environment, but you may also have dev environment set up where the disk throughput or performance may not be so critical. In such cases, you may want to evaluate, hey, do I need solid state drives here or can I do with the standard disk? Again, I'd like to reiterate the fact here, like These are the questions that we typically, pose to customers, like when we are doing such kind of activities. And more often than not, we realize, oh, for this environment, this is absolutely not needed. And when we tune them, it certainly reflects across the monthly consumption charges later on. So while your compliance, your business requirements will always take a priority, but there are always scenarios where, like dev test environment or something of that sort, it may not be so critical. So which is where, for disk, you may consider for production, while premium disks are absolutely good. For other environments, they may not be so necessary. The next thing comes is like, how is your dev test environment set up? We've seen most often with customers, what they do essentially is they just provision everything together. They maybe create a separate resource group or things like that. But what is also provided, and this is where, understanding of how subscriptions work and the knowledge aspects really come into picture. So Azure, for example, it lets you create child subscriptions. And when you create those child subscriptions, you can mark them as dev test. When you essentially mark a subscription as a dev test, what that helps you with is most of your services, they do not get charged at your regular rates. For example, if you have Windows VM running, you get charged at Linux rates. Similarly, there are benefits associated with other services also in terms of overall cost or the charges that they incur. The only thing here is anything that you run in the dev test environment, as the name suggests, doesn't have SLA, and which should be okay because as the name suggests, it is at the end of it a dev test environment. Licensing cost, that's another big factor we've seen, like, when you have environment set up, let's say, for example, you spawn up a cluster of VMs, you're running a SQL server, there will be a license cost associated with that, which will be like, based on per core basis and things like that. Now with production, what you need to deploy. But imagine a scenario, you have an equally big cluster, which is not for production. It's only for like dev test or something like that. Would it make sense for you to evaluate a developer edition of SQL, which will be free compared to having an enterprise edition running there on the same set of VMs, which can be a significant factor in terms of your overall cost for running those compute infrastructure in the cloud. At the same time, if you have some licenses, let's say on-premise for your existing infrastructure and things like that, which you are migrating to cloud, almost all cloud service providers, they also give you hybrid benefit where you can port your license to the cloud, make use of them, and at the same time, you only pay for the compute resources to the cloud provider, not necessarily for the associated licenses. Similarly, unlike production, many times we do not need your dev environments running 24/7. So can we have some kind of script or an automation in place where we turn off this VMs, let's say during non-business hours? Now imagine if you have, for example, 15 to 20 odd VMs hosting your dev workloads. And if you implement an automation of that sort, let's say turn off all my VMs at 7 p.m. and turn them on at 7 a.m., that is as good as saving 50% on the compute charges alone for this particular set of VMs. Now, having done all of this, where you figured out, you've optimized and everything, and then you have an environment where you're sure, hey, this 30, 40 odd VMs are absolutely critical for my workload. They got to be running 24/7 and all of it, which is where reserved pricing really comes into picture, So what happens is when you upfront commit to a cloud service provider, say, hey, I need this set of VMs, I'm ready to commit for 1 year or a 3-year period, and you can still pay on a monthly basis, but it's the commitment that you give. What happens in that case here is you get charged at a significantly discounted rates. So once you've sanitized your environment in terms of cost optimization aspects like the size, the instances, the start-stop policies, dev test environments, licenses, hybrid benefits, reservations definitely play a very big role in terms of what is associated with your actual cost. The moment you're ready to commit up to, it can vary from service provider. On Azure, it is like you can commit up front for 1 year or a 3-year, and the benefits can range anywhere between 40 to 60% discounts on the rates that you get for these resources. So this was like a very broad overview in terms of how do you approach optimizing any compute that you run. Similarly, let's take a look at data. You may be using various kind of databases. You may be using, let's say, a blob storage or an S3 storage. Uh, Again, here the dev test environment conversation comes into picture along with reservations. But the thing here is the bigger factor will always be, and this should be a regular practice across all the resources that you have, is monitoring, regular monitoring, review those metrics, performance, let's say on a regular basis, and see whether your tier, the pricing or the sizing tier that you've chosen for a given service, is that optimally configured. Okay, let's say if you're using Azure SQL database, you have a bunch of databases. You may want to also evaluate, does it make sense that we use elastic pools over standard, or does it make sense we move away from DTU model to vCore model, or things like that based on the performance requirements. One of the best things that is available out of the box, free of cost, that I've seen that people often overlook here is they start observing, hey, my database is getting slow, I need to provision more capacity. They do that somewhere down the line. Again, they run into the same issue. They again increase the capacity. While it can help you temporarily, but it's always a good practice to also look at how your queries are performing. Let's say in terms of databases that you host on Azure, there is a built-in engine available that tells you how your queries are performing in terms of disk throughput, your IOP requirement, your CPU needs, the time taken. And once you take a look at that, evaluate with the DBA on a team, once you optimize those queries, you may not really need that amount of compute, that you've been throwing at the instance just because the performance was going slow. More often than not, we've seen like there were some queries which were adversely affecting the entire operations of your databases. And the only thing that the customers were doing, like, go ahead, start throwing more horsepower on that, which wasn't really a long lasting solution as such, because the moment your database size grows a bit and more hits come on that query, you're going to be back at square one running or staring at the same issue. So it really makes sense in terms of what is associated with this particular thing. So it is equally important, apart from the general metrics and performance, you review, your queries and then optimize them on an ongoing basis. And further to that, once you figured out, hey, I've done everything that is needed in terms of optimally scaling this, having, optimized my queries and all of it, that is the stage when you start evaluating again reservations. You can go ahead upfront commit, as I mentioned earlier, for a 1 or a 3-year period, and then get, a differential rates that are available. If you're hosting on IaaS or things like that, again, hybrid cost will significantly, hybrid licenses will significantly bring down the cost. And at the same time, dev test and other environments, they need not be in the same way, as needed. As needed by the production, sorry. Okay, so looking at some of the other services that we have, let's say app services, if you're using, it could be like one of the examples I provided earlier in the slides. Do you need all those different app service plans to host all your front end? Like many customers I've spoken to, all they thought, like when they have a website and they stop it, the cost actually stops. Well, that is not true. When you stop a website, you basically stop serving the content, but that website is hosted using app service plan, and until and unless you delete that, there is no way to stop or pause it, and thereby there is no way to control your cost. The only thing you can do here is when you don't need it, probably move it to a free tier. Similarly, for your dev test workloads, evaluate free, shared, basic tier as per the services or capabilities that is needed. Uh, Same goes on, let's say when you have, for example, a Kubernetes cluster. For dev test workloads, when there is nobody working on it during non-business hours and things like that, you may want to evaluate, hey, can I go ahead and reduce the cluster size to 0, which is allowed. So let's say during those 12 hours, there's no need for you to have a multi-node cluster running when it's absolutely not needed. There are many things associated with networking also that comes into picture. So let's say you have resources deployed across multiple networks. Now, how are you connecting those networks to be able to communicate with each other? Earlier, we used to spawn up a separate gateways in both the network, connect those gateways, operate it in a site-to-site manner. So while you get the connectivity, what was resulting into additional cost overhead is basically having gateways running 24/7 across both the networks. What is now also available is what we refer to as network peering. You can simply peer the networks together. The all traffic between those networks, they travel over Azure network backbone. There is no need for gateway. So it is important that you keep track of all those new services coming out of the platform or the cloud service providers as they do keep releasing new features, capabilities on a rapid scale. And many of those things that we've been doing, let's say, for example, 1 year back or 6 months back, we didn't have those capabilities. You implemented a solution using certain workaround or whatever was recommended at that way. It may not be, necessary that's the best way even today. So you've got to be, on your toes, keep yourself up to date about all those capabilities that are coming in, see how you can implement them, optimize your existing setup. So that will always be the case, irrespective of how you set up. For example, media services. I'm just going to pick up some of the services where we've seen majority of cost implications with the customer. So like this customer where we saw and we saw that he was using media services with premium streaming endpoint. And when asked why are you using it, it's just like I want a consistent program. But if you look at the documentation of media services, it's very clearly written like, hey, for majority of scenario, almost 90-95% of your scenarios, a standard streaming endpoint with CDN integration should be more than enough. So that's hardly a need. There are very specific use case scenario. For example, if you're building another Netflix or something of that sort, where you may need to integrate premium streaming endpoints and all of it. Similarly, understanding and knowing how media reserve units work, how the encoding charges work, everything which is very service specific, will play a very big role in terms of determining how your infrastructure is designed and deployed. Other thing that comes with monitoring your resources. We all love insights like, hey, how my service is performing, what's my average response time, collect all this telemetry that is coming in from the client side, from the server side to ensure we get a complete visibility in terms of end-to-end operations of our solutions or the applications that are hosted on the cloud. But what we often overlook here is when you integrate, let's say, application performance monitoring and other things associated with your telemetry tracking, there are also costs associated depending on the data that is ingested. So if you start tracking each and everything that is available out of the box, you may start seeing your telemetry that is collected, it starts to bloat up significantly higher, resulting into a much higher cost footprint, at the end of the month. So you may want to look at the things in terms of, hey, what telemetry am I interested in? Can I enable only those? Okay, we've enabled those. Let's say, can I do sampling on top of that? Of course, there's built-in capability. How long do I want to retain this data? Now, depending on the service that you choose, built-in retention period is either 31 days or 90 days, which can be increased, but that will also have cost implication. So before you choose, what do you exactly need and configure service, those factors need to be considered rather than, hey, this service gives me all these capabilities, let me just start integrating it into my solution and make use of those, because every decision that you take here will play a very big role in terms of what surprises you get at the end of the month. The next thing that comes here is multi-region deployment. Now, this is totally driven by what your business defines as RPO, RTO in terms of your, availability, disaster recovery, all those, conversations associated with those points. But just because like you want to have it in different region, highly available, how do you choose those region? Remember, different services may have different cost in different regions also. So how do you choose them? What DevOps practices do you follow? Is there a built-in capability in the service which can give us this? For example, where you use Azure SQL Server, you have a built-in capability to replicate it to a different region, which will automatically, which can be configured to automatically fail using failover group. Similarly, services like Cosmos DB, you can enable which region you want to replicate. Storage, you can have multi-region deploy. So it may not be necessary that you do everything on your own. There may be certain capabilities available out of the box using the platform provided services itself, which can be made use of. That can certainly, add to help you achieve all those requirements in terms of your disaster recovery. But again, take a look in terms of what exactly is needed and then decide. I would like to repeat here, different services in different region may have different price points also. So it is equally important how do you consider those regions when you choose something, a particular region for deployment. One of the things that I forgot to mention here was about the spot instances. Almost all cloud service provider also gives you this capability of spot instances for your compute requirements. So basically this additional capacity which is underutilized in data center, you can start requesting it and using it, which comes at a much lower price point. So if you have workloads that can sustain intermittent failure or things like that, it can be a very good use case because these instances, they come at a significant lower price point compared to your standard instances that are available for your compute workloads. So evaluate that as well in terms of where you can make very good use of it. It would, one of a very good use case for spot instances could be like a burst load scenario where you have a sudden burst of load for like few minutes, and you can literally use spot instances for that, because if that burst is sudden and small, it should be able to handle that. The only drawback here is there's no guarantee in terms of what's available, how many instances are available and things like that. So you got to plan, consider all those technical aspects and plan your infrastructure accordingly. Okay, with that, let's take a break here. I'll just go through if there are any questions on the forum. Just give me one moment. Okay, so there's a good question from Richard. Like, customers almost never account for expenses of DC resources. Of course, the light bill, building space, security, and all of that. What is Microsoft doing to highlight this hidden cost? To be honest, there is nothing built in, because as you look at it, it totally, there is no one way to define what those costs may be. And when you talk about Azure resources, pretty much all of those are including those particular costs. So I often tell during my customer interaction, and this is a very good point, like it can never be like number to number comparison, because we never talk about the manpower involved in managing that infrastructure and other points that you mentioned in the question, like rental space, security aspects, electricity, and all of that. So it could be, certainly a good point, but I don't think so there's something built in, because it will always vary. Let's say some of the large enterprises, they may have their own whole setup that they've invested in, and they may say like, hey, we've invested this much, but we're going to make use of this infrastructure for next 5 years or things like that. So there's no straight away for determining this cost, but very good point. And for sure, during all my customer communications, when I talk about cost comparisons and things like that, I more often than not, I bring this like, hey, you've forgotten these things. Don't just put the numbers on the paper. Where are these numbers? So very good point. Thank you for that, Richard. Another one from Abhijit. Can you elaborate more on how child subscription can save cost? So basically what happens is, if you're a subscription owner, let's say talking specifically in the context of Azure, you can create child subscriptions if your subscription is, let's say, pay as you go or an enterprise agreement. And when you create those child subscriptions, there is a checkbox which you can enable and mark it as dev test. What happens is when you mark it as dev test, there are two things that are associated with it. First is what we call, nothing in that subscription has SLA, because as the name suggests, it is dev and test environment. The second thing here is many of the services that you get there, they will be at a different price point. Let's say, for example, as I mentioned earlier, all the Windows VM, they will be charged at Linux rates. Similarly, there are discounted rates for logic apps or SQL or many things which are documented across. So if you have a large dev test environment, it certainly makes sense that you provision those resources using a dev test subscription. Okay. There's another one we have an Azure Advisor. I'll come to that. I'm going to cover. What tool can I use to predict model cost prior to deployments other than pricing calculator, which requires way too many resource details? To be honest, that is the way, it would be like, I would say impractical for anybody to like predict the models or cost until and unless you tell at least approximately what numbers do you look at. Start with that and then review, modify, optimize as needed. To be honest, yeah, taking to the previous questions about Abhijay, when you go to pricing calculator as well, when you select a certain set of resources, there is a toggle button which is available. If you enable like apply dev test pricing, you immediately see the difference in terms of how much would it cost if you deploy it in a dev test subscription compared to a standard subscription. Okay. Telemetry, when implemented within the same cloud, I assume there should not be any ingress and egress. Can you talk about it? This is from Satish. So Satish, for telemetry, when you use, let's say, application insight or log analytics or something like that, there is a fixed limit in terms of how much data is allowed per month, beyond which you start getting charged. Let's say, for example, log analytics or app insight, I think the numbers is like 5 gigs per month is free. Thereafter, you get charged for every gig of data that is coming in as part of your telemetry. Okay, because as a service, if you look at it, log analytics or app insight, they got to store your data. It is customer specific. It is that instance specific. Not only store your data, it also gives you built-in capability to visualize this, project this as graphs and all of those. So built-in retention, let's say, for example, App Insight, 90 days of the storage of that data is included in your pricing with all those capabilities of querying and visualizing all your data. Okay. Beyond that, you can choose to increase the retention period, which will add additional cost, or you can choose, hey, I don't want to really query, but I want a copy of my data. In that case, you can enable continuous export, where you can tell App Insight resource, hey, once it is gone past its retention period, I just wanted to let it go to my storage account where, I'll review it the way I want, which should be fine. Can TCO calculator help in like for like comparison when migrating on-premise infrastructure to cloud as such? So typically for migration scenario, we have something called as like Azure migration. It's basically a tool that you run, collect your inventory, and it will then give you, let's say, an Excel report in terms of infrastructure that you would need in Azure to provision, which will match up to your on-premise environment. And once you put in this, I think that also gives a TCO probably. I'm not 100% sure. Been some time I've done that, but otherwise you get the overall infrastructure that you need, which can be put in the pricing calculator if it is not available already. So Azure migration is basically something that will help you assess your current environment. It could be on Hyper-V, VMware, or something like that. Your entire VM infrastructure environment, and then tell you approximately, how those things would shape up in Azure. Okay, so I guess we've covered all those questions. I'll move back to presentations. Just going through, how do we go about this? So moving. So let's say if you are in a situation now today, you decide, hey, I want to go back, take a look at my subscription. How can I improve and things like that? This is the approach that I take with most of my customers. And this is, to be honest, more than enough. I typically review consumption charges, let's say for last month or anything of that sort. Let's say last month or a month before that, see what the consumption charges look like. And once you have this, I try to identify the top contributors. I really don't want to spend time working on things that are not even adding 5% to the overall cost. But if there is something, which are top contributors, I tend to initially focus my efforts on those things where I can evaluate and bring in a significant change. Now, while those cost optimization discussions are valid, please remember, we need to evaluate this in the context of the application architecture. It is very, very important. You cannot simply say like, hey, I saw this is not running at an optimal capacity, let me reduce. But what if it is supposed to run, let's say, your monthly reports or quarterly reports, and only then you expect the load? It is then, you instead of telling, hey, go ahead and reduce the pricing tier or the scale, you can simply say, hey, can you implement a mechanism where you rest of the time it runs at a lower scale or price point, and then you increase it during the times when you need it. It could be also a fact like in SQL, you may choose like, hey, I don't need too much of DTUs, but if your storage database size itself is too big, you cannot go below certain amount of DTUs because of your storage requirements. So always review all these top contributors in the context of the application architecture. And then based on the actual configuration, which includes your pricing tier, I recommend options to optimize the same. Follow this like simple steps. I don't want to complicate things, but trust me, this helped me with. I can certainly say for this call, like more than 150 customers that I worked with over past 2 to 3 years, and like with this activities almost on a weekly basis. So it certainly helps, once you take this approach. But irrespective of everything else, everything has to be evaluated in the context of the application in infrastructure, and on top of that, compliance and those things will always take priority over everything else. Okay, so summarizing all our discussion points so far, these are the things that you can evaluate. So first thing is definitely reserved pricing. Almost all cloud providers, they give you an option to commit upfront and take benefits of discounted prices. Hybrid benefits when associated, like if you have licenses and all of it, make use of them. On Azure, you have a capability of depth subscriptions, then which we've spoken about even during the Q&A. Evaluate all the resources are sized optimally according to your requirements and all of it. And last but not the least, Azure Advisor. This was one of the question here, and which is where this is there on the slide. It's again like built-in capability here. Have a habit of looking at it, at least once a week, if not at least once every 2 weeks. There's a bunch of good recommendations out there in terms of security, in terms of cost, all of those coming together, provided free of the cost. There's no effort needed for you to do or configure, except for when the portal says like, hey, we have recommendations, do you want to see? Take a look at that. You may not implement all of that because of whatever XYZ reasons you may have, but take a look at that. Be aware of how your environment is performing and things like that. And the next one is cost management, which is also embedded in the cloud portal for almost all service provider. Take a look, configure your monthly budgets like, hey, for this particular set of resources, or let's say resource groups, this is my monthly budget. Alert me when I reach 70% of this or 90% of this. So nothing is basically, nothing is more embarrassing than getting surprised by the bill that you see at the end of the month. Imagine if you set up those budgets and alerts in place, and right on the 10th day of the month, you come to know, oh, I've almost used 50% of my allocated budget. There may be something that you are aware that's happening, or there may be some corrective action you may take, but this is far better than being in a state of shock at the end of the month where you've realized, oh, I've gone past my budget by almost 200%. So all these capabilities are there in the portal. Start making use of those and set those alerts, set those budgets, depending on the workloads that you're hosting and all of it. And last but not the least, Azure Monitor. Keep monitoring your resources, not only as like how are they performing, are they available or not, also in terms of metrics, performances, have we configured them correctly? Is this what we need? Am I optimally sized? Pretty much across the board. It should not be like only compute or your data. Across the board, all the services that you use, you got to have those things, in place. And what to say, more importantly, as I mentioned during one of the slides, this is the cultural change that we need. Like, it cannot be discounted anymore, compared to traditional day where we got, one monster hardware and that's it. We never bothered about other things, on an ongoing basis. Here, everything has an impact on an ongoing basis. So it is very, very important. So that's pretty much it in terms of what I had to cover. I'll take a look at a few more questions here, but open to any other questions you have, and feel free to post them there. And apart from that, I'll appreciate if you can go ahead and fill up the Reactive survey. Please enter the event code, which is 7625. And that's pretty much it. Looking at the questions, there's one more from Abhijit. How and where to check the reserve pricing? So if you're on a Microsoft sponsor subscription, reservations will not be available. But if you otherwise have, let's say, paid subscription or an EA subscription, you can simply go ahead in the top search box, just type in reservations. Once you go to reservations, it will list down all the services that you can use reservations for. Okay, and then you will be able to choose what reservations, what time period, and it will actually show you how much are you saving if you go for that particular pricing tier. Let's say, for example, there was one more question. I'll go back to that. For telemetry, predict, just a moment, what was it? There's one question about telemetry. So for example, reservations is also available for your telemetry. Let's say if you're going to say, hey, I need a daily capacity of 100 gigs per day of data ingestion and something like that, you do get reservations even for that, and appropriate discounts will be available. Okay. Next questions from Satish. Can you talk about custom instance type where an CPU intensive workload which doesn't require a lot of memory that I get along with the CPU that I reserve? How do I reduce the append? That is not something that you get to play with. I don't think so, any of the service providers. But if you look at it, depending on the size of the VMs, so let's say N series VMs that we have in Azure, they'll be GPU focused. There will be like L series, similarly M series, which are more memory intensive, and so on. Depending on the series of the VMs that you choose, you get either more CPU or more memory or GPU capabilities and all of it. That is the layer at which you get to take call. But let's say once you've figured out, hey, this is the CPU that I need, I don't think so you have flexibility to play with the memory that is coming along with that. Because at the end of it, it is not like those are not individual components that you're paying for. What you're paying for is that whole compute instance on a per minute basis. I hope that answers your questions. Guess we have a couple of more minutes in case somebody has other questions. More than happy to handle them. So in case you need to reach out, you can certainly, ping me out there as well. If anybody of you is part of like Microsoft or startup, you can always reach out to your, let's say, startup engagement manager to schedule a session with my team. I will be more than happy to do this activity along with you on a dedicated basis as well. I guess that's it then. Thank you, everybody. Thank you for taking time out. I hope that session was fruitful to you. I look forward to connect to you sometime in future, maybe on something different. And Hossam, feel free to take over. I guess there are no more questions at the moment.
Thank you, Punit, for sharing your experience with our community and highlighting this important aspect of cloud solution management and optimizing costs and everything. I would like to share with our community just a couple of things that are upcoming and a couple of links that also will be beneficial for them. So I'm taking off the screen share. Yes. So basically, we have a few interesting sessions that are upcoming, and I wanted to highlight them. On Wednesday, we have Architecting for Scale. This is an important session that you don't want to miss. Kubernetes best practices on Sunday. Introduction to Python and Panda, and analyzing, like learning more on data science. That's on Monday, July 6th. And then we will also learn about Visual Studio Code Spaces on Wednesday with Rory Prady, a cloud advocate. So these are important sessions that I wanted to draw your attention to. Everything is published on meetup.com and on our group, Microsoft Reactor Abu Dhabi. So these are the sessions. I highly encourage you to go on Meetup and join these events. I also encourage you to continue the journey. First of all, highlight again, I want you to take a couple of minutes just to share your feedback with us on the Reactor survey. Enter the event ID because there are a few questions that are specific to this event. And also we have few general questions that are related to your background, your interests, what kind of things and topics you would like to learn more about so that we can account for those and include them in our programming. So this is the first one. It will just take a couple of minutes to do. I highly encourage you to do it. And I also want you to subscribe to our newsletter. This is something new that we're doing. So everything will be on Meetup as a major channel for our community to host and manage the registration for events, but we also have more things that are coming, and the newsletter will be a very interesting one to be part of. So you just need to go on our website, and I'll post all these links in the Q&A section so that you can check out. So you go to the newsletter on our website and you subscribe there. So you will have access to more content, more webinars, more learning opportunities that are coming from Reactor Abu Dhabi and globally. All the other reactors. We have global events and we have also cross-promoted events from the nearby reactors. So you don't want to miss out on these events as well. The third one is Microsoft Cloud Society. Also, this is something important for you to continue the journey, to check out learning paths, learn more about technologies that interest you, and find out events and webinars that you can also join. So that will be the third link. I'm going to put them all in the Q&A. And finally, Microsoft.source. This is a newsletter that is a major source for developer news, technology, event, lots of things that will be interesting. I think that's it for the links that I wanted to share. Continue the journey, keep learning. And thank you again, Punit, for sharing your experience. And thank you everyone for being with us today on this session. We will have it soon on YouTube, and this will be accessible for you. For those who ask for also the presentation, I'll get them from Punit and share the link. So basically, just make sure you are registered also on the local page on Reactor Abu Dhabi meetup group, and I will post the link there. All right. Thank you, everyone, and thank you, Punit. Stay
Thanks,
safe,
everybody.
everyone.
Good day. Bye.
Bye.